culture matters. Culture happens whether you are intentional about it or not. And I think understanding how to be intentional and how to embrace the culture that exists, because like I said, it's there whether you've been intentional about it or not. So how do you take the culture that exists? How are you intentional about shaping it into something that you want it to be, or that you think would help move a company forward? Or the thing that surprised me most is how impactful culture is, especially in a high growth, rapidly moving, company like that. If you're not intentional about it, it can lead you astray. It can lead you in a lot of different directions, and it could be very divisive in a business if you're not intentional about creating it and nurturing the culture that you want to set forward.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing the elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Kevin McGinnis. Kevin is the president and CEO of Keystone Community Corporation, a nonprofit organization tasked with the planning, development, and operations of a thriving and diverse and innovative community in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Prior to Keystone, he was the founder and CEO of Pinsight Media, a wholly owned big data analytics subsidiary of Sprint Corporation. In fact, he had spent 25 years in a variety of capacities at Sprint in product development and other roles. Kevin has a bachelor's degree in organizational communications from the University of Kansas. You can learn more about Kevin at keystonedistrict.org. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Kevin.
Kevin, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
Thanks, Jeff. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we reconnected in late January. We were in the early startup days of Sprint long distance, although you're quite a bit younger than me probably. But yeah, it was fun to catch up. And as we talked about, I was picking my brain because I'm like, yeah, I've obviously heard of Kevin and all the stuff he's done, but I'm like, I know we have met once before, at least, but I could not find any evidence of it. Then you reminded me we worked together at Sprint, and just to my defense, you didn't start your Sprint career on LinkedIn, at least, you didn't go as far back as when you started. So I was like, well, he was there after I left. So anyhow, it's all good.
Well, when you've been there 25 years, you hesitate to put it all down there, right? Yeah. Put it all in LinkedIn. So, it was great to get reconnected. For sure.
Yeah. What I love about your career, especially at a Fortune 100 company, is you found a way to really, go outside the mothership, the, more mature corporate structure and organization to work with entrepreneurs and startups, and obviously we're going to talk about that, but I think it's a beautiful career strategy, and it's going to be fun to talk about all your learnings and experience really in the startup and technology space. So let's start with a fun question though, Kevin. Even for people that know you a little bit, what one thing would surprise them about you?
I think a lot of people think I'm from Kansas. They actually don't know that I was born in West Virginia and spent my early years, as a Navy brat, up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Lived overseas, as a kid. So I think a lot of people just see me as kind of a Kansas native. Been here my whole life. So I think that's one thing that I think would surprise people.
So being kind of moving a lot, being a Navy brat, what was fun for you growing up?
It's funny. You look back on parts of your life, Jeff, and in the moment, you don't realize what you're doing. And then when you get later on in life, you look back on those moments and you realize how fortunate you might have been, or how much that experience meant to you. And I think as a young child, moving around and living as many places as I did, it really kind of provided some resilience, some adaptability, like some, inherent things that have, really served me well as I've gotten older and as I've gone through my career or progressed through life in general. I think the best part of that, though, in hindsight, weren't those traits that were developed, or those patterns of life that were developed, but it was the experiences. I mean, I had the opportunity to go to places and live in places like Rabat, Morocco, and Rota, Spain, and on the southern coast of Spain by Malaga, and to go overseas with my father a lot, as he served in the Navy, and seeing perspectives and seeing the world at that age, I think really changes when you come home, and it changes how you see even your hometown or even your life, because it's opened your eyes to all of these other experiences that other people have. And so I think I was really fortunate in hindsight, being able to travel that much as a young kid and being able to see the country, see international destinations. So lucky I got to do that.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. I firmly believe that the younger generation growing up, college age, high school, if you have the financial means to travel, especially abroad, you just get a different perspective of life, and how we're in a the U.S. bubble, and even the U.S. is different in different places. Montana is different, obviously, than New York City, and even upstate New York is different than New York City. So, but it's just experiencing different cultures, different world views, and how people live is just a great learning experience.
So one thing I encourage anybody to do at a younger age is travel, and I think you're right. It doesn't have to be international. The country is so diverse, and there's so many different perspectives. So I would encourage anybody, when you travel, be immersive about it. Try to understand the life of a local when you're in an area. Don't just focus on kind of the touristy places, or the places that you might see on marketing brochures. Stop in and talk to people that live there and understand it. And I think that's where you get the most rewarding and enriching experiences.
Yeah, and what I recommend too is you're not going to learn the language in a month or two or whatever time that you prep, but just doing the effort of speaking the native language goes so far in bonding with people of that country, because they know you're trying. you know we went to Italy, and I should have learned Italian growing up because my parents were immigrants, but I kind of said, I'm an American, I'm not an Italian, so I kind of pushed away my culture, embraced it post college. But yeah, just doing that is just it builds the relationships better, because they know you're trying.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've had the been afforded the luxury of being able to travel with a group of people. Usually we try to do something once a year where we'll go to a different location. We've had a few years off over the 20 plus years that we've been doing it. But that's always the goal, is try to learn enough of the native language to at least demonstrate that you're making the effort. And I think you're right. I've always found that if you make the effort, people are so willing to meet you halfway, or meet you 90% of the way if you've only got the 10% filled out. But and it really makes that experience, that immersive experience and that opportunity so much richer when you do that.
Yeah.
And with tools like Duolingo now, and the things that we
Yeah.
have at our disposal to learn languages in a shorter amount of time, or at least the enough of the language to where you can find your way around or ask the basic questions, it goes a long way, to your point.
Yeah, that's what I used before our 2 week trip to Italy. I used Duolingo, and a lot of things. I was listening to my parents and my aunts and uncles speaking Italian, so I had an ear for it. And my grandmother, who was never an American citizen, she passed when she was 92 years old. She never spoke a word of English. So,
Wow.
and she
Wow.
lived in our backyards attached, but we could communicate. So, that stuff came back to me a little bit. But anyhow, Well, what any aspirations as a child? Did you want to go in the Navy like your dad, or what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my gosh, my dad had two. My dad was a physician. He was a physician in the Navy, and my dad had two requirements for my brother and I. I started with one sibling through my first marriage, and then when my parents got divorced and remarried, my family grew exponentially. But it was just my brother and I in these early days when my dad was in the service, and he had one requirement. He said, "You can't be a doctor and you can't be in the Navy." That was his requirement for us. So no, didn't have any aspirations to be like my father in that kind of way. My mother was a minister. My mother was a community activist. My mother was someone who was very involved in supporting, the church and the community. So, I took a lot away from what she had done, and I think I stored a lot of that back in my mind, and that's kind of emerged later on in my career here with what I'm doing now. But I think when I was a kid, honestly, I was a baseball guy. Man, I played baseball morning, noon, and night if I could, and so grew up playing baseball, loved the sport, and really just wanted to, saw myself, playing in the big leagues someday. And then you get old enough to realize, the best you might do is travel around on a bus in small towns in the Midwest someday, and you decide you probably ought to get a real job or get an education and figure out, how to move beyond that dreaming aspiration of being a professional sports athlete. But yeah, that was where I was at as a kid.
Finally, out of my almost 80 guests that somebody wanted to play professional sports, you're the first one because I always tell people I wanted to be a quarterback in the NFL. That dream ended very quickly, but
Yeah, no, I was going to play in the major leagues. That was my aspiration. Actually all the way up until I got to college, and then I realized that it was, you start the level of competition starts to pick up around you. I had a couple of injuries that I had dealt with that I felt like were pretty instrumental in, what I was going to be able to do long term, and it had to put that one on the back burner and just become a professional sports fan at that point.
well, and I think baseball, especially. So, one of my daughters, she dated a KU baseball, I'll say star, and it was like fifth in the Big 12 in batting average. First in doubles. 6'3", 6'4", good speed, good arm, and that was his senior year. And what I realized after listening to 2 straight years of on the internet the Major League Baseball draft is, it's 30 teams times 40 rounds,
Right.
1,200 people, get drafted, give or
Right.
take. And it goes to high school. So it's not just college people, and it's people from the, outside of the US, he didn't even get drafted. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough. But anyhow, this is not this is not sports talk radio. I'm not competing with the Kelsey brothers. Don't worry, Travis and Jason. I'm not coming after you. Um,
Yeah.
so you decide on KU in terms of college, or what was it? And I know you graduated with a communication major. Was that your first major, or did you change majors as you progress, like many of the guests?
I mean, this will be somewhat of a confessional moment for me, I think, and I think a lot of people were probably in the same boat. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I still, I meet with people all the time when I mentor Jeff, and I hear, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm not sure what I want to do. And these are people in their 20s and 30s. I'm like, man, I didn't even figure it out. I'm not even sure I figured it out yet. I'm in my 50s. Um, but yeah, I was, let me think. I went to community college in Dodge City for a year, and then came up to KU, and I think sports medicine was where I was headed. And then I think I tried to get into the business school, and not tried. I actually hated accounting 101. It was a weed out course, and so I was one of those people that were like, I can't do this. I'm not going to be doing spreadsheets and you know accruals and all that for the rest of my life. So I wasn't a finance guy, and had kind of bounced around trying to figure out what degree made sense and what path, what would be the most useful for me. And at some point I walked into the counselor's office there at KU and said, what's the fastest way out of here? I need to get a piece of paper and I need to get done with this. And they recommended a communications degree. And it's another one of those moments in my career that when I think about the serendipity of the decisions that you make, because at that age, I don't know that you understand the impact of a decision like that necessarily, but it is, again, a decision that changed my life, a decision that really kind of put me in a position to do more of the things I've been able to do in my career because I understood it was organizational communication too. So it was how do organizations work, the theory of rhetoric and influence and communication skills that were really important, the theory of interview, certain things that became super pragmatic and very useful for me throughout my career, and running organizations and being in a leadership position. I'm very thankful that I ended up with a communications degree, even though it was technically the shortest path between 2 points as I tried to get out of school there.
Yeah, but as a 20-year-old-ish young adult, that's, it's really, long-term thinking, really. Like, okay, here's where I'm at. I hate accounting. I guess accounting's like the organic chemistry if you're pursuing some kind of medical career, because that's the weed out.
Yeah, those were my two. Those are my
Yeah.
the two weed out moments. Was the biology side of the sports medicine. It's a medical field, right? And that was not going to be for me. And then the financial side of business. I mean, I've learned to do it over the years, and I've learned to do it pretty well. But it was not a passion or an interest or something that I thought I wanted to do at that time. And where I landed ended up being really it fit, right?
Yeah.
It fit well for where I was.
Yeah. So you graduate. Tell us about your first job out of KU and how did you get it?
So I worked in the restaurant industry in college. So once I kind of doubled down and earned my own way through school, it was really the restaurant industry had been good to me from that perspective. So when I graduated from school and came over to Kansas City, my first job was actually bartending at Houlihan's at 95th Street, and then my first, we'll call it day job, I worked in at Peachtree Windows and Doors, Mid Rivers Distributing. They were a firm in Lenexa. I did warehouse work for them for a while, and then I actually did inside sales where I was working with builders on big, large orders for windows and doors for houses that they were building and things along that line. And then my wife, I got married right out of college. My wife got pregnant, and I needed better insurance. And someone had told me, right down the street from where I was at over there in Lenexa was a telemarketing center, and they were hiring for telemarketing positions. And so that was my first time I worked at Sprint.
Yeah.
I worked at the National Residential Sales Center out there at what was it, 10951 or something like that, Lakeview Drive,
Right.
out of
Yeah.
Lenexa.
Yeah. Was in that building many times. So, I'd love to hear your take on this because, I think, inside sales is really, especially for young adults right out of college, it's really a great experience, I think, because one, you're going to get a lot of practice listening and selling to people, right? And helping them with proposals. And as well as I always say, selling is hard, but I think selling on the phone is really hard because you really you can't see body language or anything like that. But I would love your view because we were in the time of smile and dial, just constant. We had, I don't know, that was an internal call center Sprint, but we had residential call centers that we outsourced to business partners, and I went on to, business service group, did the same thing, like 6 call centers, just constantly dialing and trying to acquire, new customers. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that experience.
Every year I get the chance to speak to some college students, and I always tell them again, this is another one of those things where everybody always is looking for the job that they want at the end of the story, and not thinking about how you accrue the skills, experiences, and in many ways, the mindset that you need to even be successful in that job. And so the two things that I think I was very fortunate to do, one, working in the restaurant industry, fast paced, every day is different. You're facing people a lot. You have to think on your feet. Customer service, I spent a lot of time in the front of the house, a lot of time bartending. And so that was a great experience. But then the second one was definitely working in the call center. And that was the numbers game and the rejection and having to overcome that and having to, the ability to develop some resilience and some grit. And we hear that phrase a lot in the entrepreneurial ecosystem now. Grit is such a word that's, thrown around a lot, but how do you get grit? How do you build resilience, especially in a professional capacity? And I think those telemarketing jobs and that the telemarketing center really gave me the opportunity to do that. And even though it wasn't a tremendous amount of time. It was a little over a year that I was doing outbound telemarketing, but I mean, a year of every day. And it's funny, I was going to call it smiling and dialing, same as you, because I think that I still have the mirror that they give you so you can see
Yes,
yourself smile when I
smile.
still have that mirror. Yeah. With the little red logo on it, was red Sprint logo on it.
Yep, the
That job
diamond.
was invaluable. Yeah, that job was incredibly important in who I am now and those next steps in my career. So I don't look back on it. I mean, I worked in a meatpacking plant when I was in Dodge City. I'm thankful for all the jobs I've had, and you try to take those little bits of every experience that you have and every job that you have in your journey and build on them. And telemarketing was a really important one for me.
Yeah, and then and you've had a long storied career at Sprint. Yeah, tell us about some of the early learnings once you kind of came to, as we affectionately call 8140 Ward Parkway, the address of the Sprint long distance headquarters. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I got an internship. So my first opportunity to actually get off the phones and get into, a desk job or get into another role was an internship that I had in marketing there at 8140 in corporate headquarters. And I think, Jeff, some of the early things that I picked up in my career, I worked in an organization that was led by a woman named Nancy Faulkner, who I think I know. I know you know Nancy, and she had the opportunity to sit me down one time we'd been in a vendor review, some of these telemarketing vendors that you're talking about that are out of town. I had the opportunity to support them from a leads management perspective. And we had a situation in one of the meetings where things hadn't exactly been going well with the leads that we provided them and so on. And there was some back and forth in the meeting about who was responsible and what we're going to do about it and so on. And I was just trying to navigate the meeting right at the time. And when I got back to Kansas City and had the opportunity to sit down with Nancy in a skip level meeting, first, it was the first skip level meeting I'd ever had. I didn't even understand what a skip level meeting was, right? But she had really imparted two things on me at that point. One is the need for preparation going into a meeting. You should be prepared for all the scenarios. You should think through how the agenda, they don't just give you an agenda so you know what they're going to talk about. They give you an agenda so you can be prepared. Be prepared to contribute, and you can be prepared to add value. And so that was, I think, number one was the lack of preparation going into that meeting. And I tried to never let that happen again. And the second one was she said, your job, no matter what your role is, no matter who you report to, your job is always to make your manager look good. And when she said that, it landed wrong. I mean, when she said it, I thought, well, that doesn't sound right. And then she went on to explain to me this idea that if your focus is on doing the things that your manager needs and supporting the business, things roll up in a business. We used to do link reviews where you do top-down planning and understanding that relationship between you and your manager and your manager's role in the business and ensuring that your manager is always in a position to meet the business objectives and meet the goals. That is your role as an employee, is to make sure that your manager is successful. And at the time when you're an individual contributor like that, it might not sit right. But as you become a manager, you start to realize the importance. And as you become a leader and you get higher in an organization, you're hoping all of your employees are putting you in a position to be successful because you're trying to meet the objectives of the business. So it made sense more and more as I started to move through my career, but it was the first time I heard it, and it was very impressionable and something that was very meaningful for me as I moved on.
Yeah, no, I love that. I used to always say, the biggest compliment you can get as somebody that works for you directly is you make my job easier. That's the biggest compliment because, that's what you want. You want to develop leaders, and as you move up, and you've done a lot of that in your time. You have to be more strategic, right? You can't be involved in the day to day, and that's where you're building competencies within your, team members, right? So Kevin, you're on the phones, start your career in kind of in the construction building industry, go to Sprint, smile and dialing for long distance on the consumer side, selling residential long distance. How did you kind of migrate into this unbelievable technology career?
Well, I was fortunate enough to have my parents were learners, lifelong learners. And it's something that has stayed with me that I don't think I appreciated as much, as a youth or as I was earlier in my career, but it was always a mindset I had, that idea of always absorbing new information, always facing new things, new challenges, and wanting to continue to grow as an individual. So for me, it was always trying to find that next kind of emerging spot where I could go learn. And so the jobs that I liked, the jobs that I landed in were always, and I think you referenced this earlier, I was really lucky in my career at Sprint to always be kind of on the front side of the business, or kind of on the edges of the business. It never seemed like I worked for one company for that long. And so those series of roles and series of kind of individuals that I would run into that would kind of help move my career along, just put me in a really good position to continue to learn. And at some point in time, I'd worked in enough, I'll call them functional roles. I'd worked in telemarketing, I'd worked in database management, I'd worked and managed a customer care center, I'd worked in marketing, a couple different roles in marketing. I'd worked in retail sales, both on the, the Radio Shack and Staples side and on the front side. And I was asked to become, I was actually recruited by a gentleman named Jeff Luther to come into a product role. And for me, that move into product was, I think, the next, big incremental, step function change in my career, because product puts you kind of at the center of the wheel. And all those other experiences that I had functionally, they started to make sense to me in a more systemic way in that product role. And once you're in a product role, you manage a product lifecycle, you manage a product roadmap, you're responsible for developing and implementing and managing a product. You're kind of at the edge of that technology role, especially when you're working at a technology company like Sprint. So you don't have a choice. You can't fake it. You got to really start to dive into, understanding the technologies, understanding how things work as a product manager, regardless of what your product is. And so being in that first product role and then continuing to evolve my career through the product organization really kept me, whether it was in Silicon Valley or early days of South by Southwest in Austin, or MIT Media Lab in Boston, or just working with our own R&D team and our own folks in Kansas City, folks like Jason Delker and others who were really instrumental in me becoming a pseudo technologist, if you will. It was just kind of the path, right? You really didn't have an option but to learn those things and embrace those things in that product function.
Yeah. So what were your big learnings, and as well as tell the audience about what that working with founding startup companies in Silicon Valley, the early days of South by Southwest had to be phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it was great. It was dynamic. You were around a lot of energetic people who were really trying to do amazing things. It started for me really working in Silicon Valley. When I was managing product, this was, in the 2007 timeframe. It was right around the time that Dan Hesse took over the company, took over Sprint. He'd rolled out a product, Simply Everything, where we had to basically transform the front-facing marketing plan and strategy for the company all within kind of a week. And we bundled a bunch of services into the single rate plan. Well, for us, we want the services we were going to bundle into this rate plan. They were all startups in Silicon Valley. They were all early stage technology company, and we had to go renegotiate deals. We had to go change. These were companies that might have had tens of thousands of subscribers with their product on our network before, and they were going to instantly be bundled into a plan, and they were going to have millions of people that might be using their product the next day. So for me, learning how to adjust working in this big corporate environment and dealing with these companies who are very laser focused on solving a very specific problem and on a trajectory that was very different than the one we were on. We were a mature company. We'd been around, 100 years. Dealing with these smaller companies really kind of changed how I thought business worked, at the speed at which business worked, and really started to help me appreciate the faster a big company can move, the more of a competitive advantage it can be. I mean, it works for these small companies. So how can you instill some of those things into a larger company? So I think that was the first one. I think the second one was this idea of failing fast. And I heard that a lot in the startup community, fail fast. And Jeff, I do not like that phrase. I do not think that's the right mindset. But what it taught me was those failures, the reason they tell you to fail fast is because that every failure is a learning opportunity and affords you the ability to pivot or to iterate what you're doing and to make it better the next time. And in the startup community, you have a series of, or in a startup, especially a technology startup, you have a series of these fits and starts where you learn something and you change it and you move and you iterate and you go and you build on top of it. And I think this failing versus learning mentality is another thing that has stuck with me, is like, you can't be afraid to fail. That's where I think the core learning should be, is don't be afraid to fail, because every failure is a learning opportunity. And I think more corporate folks, larger industry folks and bigger companies, medium to large companies, could really kind of use that mindset. And it's been something that I've tried to, carry on with me through my career as well. But it was great. Those were great days. I mean, if you remember those 2000, like the 2007 to 2013, 2014 window, just as an ecosystem, as an industry, was a crazy time to be in telecom and to be working with a lot of the companies that we had the opportunity to work with.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal. Like, as we chatted about over coffee. So around 2014, I think it was 2014, you get your first CEO role to head up Pinstripe Media. Tell us about what Pinstripe was and what was your biggest kind of learning there? Like, oh, now I'm in charge of the whole business unit. What?
Yeah, the story of Pinsight really had started much earlier than that 2014, because we'd been working, as a person in a product role, or I'll just say, or more loosely, as a person who's in an innovation role, where you're expected to bring new things and new growth opportunities to a big company. You learn quickly that being an innovator in a big company, you're treated, and I learned this from a gentleman named John Hagel, who ran Deloitte Center for the Edge. You're seen more as a virus inside of a large company. And so, you have all these things that are in a large company that are trying to prevent you from distracting from the core business model, which this company has established. And so Pinsight's journey started more as hey, we have this opportunity to do something very different than the company does today. It could be huge. It could be something that generates a tremendous amount of revenue, but it's a different customer. It's a different product. It's a different implementation altogether. And we spent years trying to do it inside the organization. And it was tough, because everybody has a veto in a big company like that, right? I mean, no matter what your role, no matter what your level in an organization, it just takes one lower level person to say they're not going to do it because it's not their job. And it really sidetracks a project or a program like that. And so trying to figure out how to, one, get Pinsight and the work we were doing to monetize data and monetize data assets, to get that to even happen took a really long time. It took us a good probably 5 years to really get that to the point where it was an internal project, an internal program that had legs. We announced it at MMA in New York City. But even then, it was still an internal program within the product organization. And until we moved that outside the company, we acquired a small startup firm, Handmark, here in Kansas City, Augie Gross's company. We acquired them in the 2013 timeframe. And getting the technology, getting the program outside the company where it could be managed like a startup, treated like a startup, was the first big step. And we were fortunate to be able to do that. Dan gave us the opportunity to do that. And then, all of a sudden you're thrust into a position where you're now the one calling the shots. It was, we renamed the acquisition Pinsight Media, and it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Sprint. So you're still in that, a lot of learnings about, you're outside, but you're not all the way outside, right? You're still part of a big company. You're still subject to a lot of the same things that conditions inside of a large industry and inside of a large organization. But you did have a lot of autonomy. How you built your team, how you managed day to day, how you did a lot of those things and made a lot of those decisions. And I was fortunate enough to have some of that autonomy because we were successful. We were free cash flow positive. So we were given a little bit more, afforded more allowances than I think some of the divisions within the company that were inside still were. So it was a great time. It was a fantastic learning experience for me to build a team like that, to build a company that was, not core to the business, to grow a company. And we were, at 120 employees when we finally sold the company in 2017. And it was, I look back again, it's just one of those things, Jeff, where you look back on it, try to embrace the day-to-day and being present today, because I keep looking back on things in my career and being like, oh, that was a really good time. Wish I'd have known it was a really good time when it was happening, or appreciated it was a really good time when it was happening,
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
Any big surprise when you were finally head of a 100, well, I know it was 120 employees in the beginning, but I mean, like, okay, now I'm in charge of everything, and anything surprise you, within the first 90 days of, being named the CEO?
Yeah, culture matters. Culture happens whether you are intentional about it or not. And I think understanding how to be intentional and how to embrace the culture that exists, because like I said, it's there whether you've been intentional about it or not. So how do you take the culture that exists? How are you intentional about shaping it into something that you want it to be, or that you think would help move a company forward? Those were all the key learnings, I think, in the early days. Or the thing that surprised me most is how impactful culture is, especially in a high growth, rapidly moving, company like that. Like if you're not intentional about it, it can lead you astray. It can lead you in a lot of different directions, and it could be very divisive in a business if you're not intentional about creating it and nurturing the culture that you want to set forward. So I think that was the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that. I've had Jonathan Jones, who's the cultural conversation leader of Demdeco, a local kind of business gifting company that's been around forever. But he said, yeah, culture is like your lawn. You're going to have a lawn no matter if you take care of it or if you ignore it. So
Right.
that's exactly
Right.
what you said.
That's a good, and I have to use that one because that's exactly right.
Pinsight gets bought by, so you're now looking for a job within Sprint or outside of Sprint. What happened at this point in your career?
Well, this is like a lot of the transitions in my career. It happened before, and I think a lot of people, when you talk about career pathing or you talk about career journeys, oftentimes it's who you know, not what you know. And so I had been, as a person, we started the Sprint Accelerator in 2013 when I was running product. So that was kind of a passion project for me to really increase Sprint's corporate engagement in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Kansas City. So that happened right about the same time as Pinsight was kind of getting its legs and becoming its own organization. So those two projects were running in parallel for me. So this community engagement project had me more involved in the civic community. I was one of the few Sprint executives that was actually off campus a lot, right? I was in the city a lot. I was where the Sprint Accelerator was down here in the Crossroads. Pinsight Media was downtown Kansas City, Missouri. So I wasn't in the bubble that was the Sprint campus. I was out in the community and had been asked to participate in various boards, various advisories, various functions from a civic capacity perspective. And one of those was an initiative called KC Rising, which was really trying to develop this kind of 20-year bi-state economic development plan for the Kansas City region. And as part of that there were three subcommittees. One was focused on talent, or one was focused on sectors, like what sectors does Kansas City have and how we should support those. One was focused on talent, that we attract, retain, and develop talent to support those sectors for economic growth. And then one was ideas. And there was a pretty small group. It was actually, it's funny, headed by another former Sprint executive, Ron LeMay, who was at Open Air Ventures. He was leading this ideas subcommittee that I was on. And we identified a couple gaps that we wanted to go that we thought would be instrumental if we were to solve these two challenges that could be that could afford us some economic change in this area. One was access to capital, and one of the individuals who was on that subcommittee was a woman named Darcy Howe. She started the Casey Rise Fund, which has been a successful sidecar VC fund here in Kansas City. And the other thing that we had identified was this lack of place. That the Sprint Accelerator at the time was a great example of where if you create a place, that you start to see collaborations and you start to see, growth coming from that placemaking side of it. But Kansas City and its innovation ecosystem is massive geography, all these innovation assets, but they're all spread out so far that there's not a lot of collaboration, and there's not a lot of collisions that happen within those that lead to greater explosions of innovation and ideas. So that project that had been identified in 2014, 2015, this project called Innovation Hub, nothing happened with it. We would meet as a group, we would meet every couple months. Ron would call me every now and then and say, hey, have we made any progress on this project? And I was like, Ron, just like you, I'm leading a company. Like, I don't have a lot of time to devote to leading another project like this. And I think that's what happens in a lot of these civic arenas, where civic leaders get together and they identify a problem and a solution. But if you don't dedicate a leader and you don't dedicate someone and the resources to go make it happen, nothing happens. So you just sit around and you talk about it. So when I left at the beginning of 2018 was when I had made my exit from Sprint. Because there's a few months they were going through regulatory approvals where I was kind of hanging out. And then I was packaged out at the beginning part of February, I think, of 2018. Some of these civic leaders, specifically a woman named Jewel Scott, who was still the president of the Civic Council at the time, and her and I were having coffee one morning, and she said, hey, you should take this project up and work on it. Now that you've got some free time, now that you're trying to figure out what your next chapter is. And that's what I did. I started kind of investigating what it would take to get this Innovation Hub project on track. And, here we are 6 years later, and it's the Keystone Innovation District is how it landed. And there was a whole, huge journey and, series of learnings through this project, but that was how it started. It was really started through just someone saying, hey, you'd worked on this in the past. Why don't you volunteer some time to maybe kind of come back and volunteer some time to work on it? And that's what I did.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Keystone here in a moment, but I'm going to have to ask you hopefully a fun question, just to wind up your Sprint career. What was the craziest thing you saw a Sprint executive do during your 24-year career at Sprint?
Oh my gosh, craziest thing I saw a Sprint executive do. Man. Jeff, that's a tough one. I've seen some crazy things, but I think when you're a Sprint executive, you tend to file all of those crazy things in the back. Like, we don't talk about some of this stuff. Like, it's like Vegas. It's all like Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I would say this craziest thing I ever saw was we were launching a product in Las Vegas at CES or at CTI. I think it was CES maybe, and Sprint loved to do things on big stages, loved to have all the press in the audience, and it was a product launch, and we'd gone through all of the demos for hours beforehand to make sure everything worked just right. And then I get up, we make the big announcement, the voice of God announces, you come out on stage and you get ready to do your presentation, and the tech failed. Like, it crapped out. And so you're on stage in front of, and the lights are in your eyes, but you can still see. I just remembered the craziest thing I've ever saw an executive do. You could see the faces, but you couldn't exactly see who they were, but you knew it was press. Like, you knew these were the people, like the tech bloggers and all the people that were going to write about the experience. So you're song and dancing the best you can to try to keep the things going while they're fixing the demo in the background. But there was one person I kept seeing in the audience, and I was like, I recognize that individual, but it just seemed out of place to me. And so I walk off stage, we get the demo going back on, and things go well, and we salvage it. And so as I'm coming off stage, one of the PR people grabbed me, and they're like, oh my gosh, did you see who's out there? And I said, well, I thought I saw somebody. I'm not sure who it was, but it looked like Gallagher, right? The comedian with the big hammer that would smash watermelons on stage.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And they were like, well, it's so funny you say that, because Gallagher's standing over here and wants to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So you remember, when you walk off these stages, like, you have to go do interviews. You have to go sit down with Kara Swisher. You have to go sit down with, the tech crunch or whoever it might be. And instead they're like, Gallagher wants to talk to you, and we think this would be a great photo op, but you come over here and talk to Gallagher. And I'm like, okay, weird that this comedian is in the audience and wants to chat about this product that we just launched. And I walk over there, and it turns out he's a physicist by education. Wow. He's a big brain guy. but his personal passion is that telecom signals, the signals from in wireless telephony are going to kill us all. And there's no way that you can have the phone on this side of your head and the radio tower be on the other side of your head, and those things can't be going through your head and not creating some change to your metabolism or to your physiology. And so he wanted to interview me about my thoughts on whether or not the technology was killing people. And it was just the craziest moment, because I think psychologically you're prepared to do one thing, right? You've spent weeks and specifically days preparing to your talking points, going over your media training, going over all of this, and then you get thrown this wild curveball that this comedian wants to talk to you about something that's entirely different. And it was just one of those experiences, one of the craziest things that had happened to me there. I will say I had another experience where we used to run the developer program at Sprint, and those developer conferences that we ran. I mean, you had several thousand people that would show up to those things. All of our service providers, all of our partners would show up to the developer conference, and we had moved it from Fort Lauderdale to San Jose. And it was the first year we're doing it at San Jose. We expected 20, I think over 2,000 people to be there for the keynote, the kickoff keynote, the first thing in the morning. And I'd been prepping my boss for his keynote speech for weeks. We wrote the speech and we got him prepared, and we changed the verbiage and we changed all the language to fit what he wanted to say. And we had all of this done, and we did the walkthrough the night before. Had the welcome reception that was going on, and I was the host. I ran the developer program. So I had to be at this welcome reception, but I went into the big stage to do this walkthrough with my boss. And right in the middle of the walkthrough, Jeff, he just turns around, he looks at me, and he goes, I can't do this. I can't do this keynote. You do it. And just said, you're going to do this keynote in the morning. So I went from trying to manage the logistics of this massive conference that we had with 2,000 people and all these partners there and all this stuff, to all of a sudden I got handed the opening keynote the next morning, less than 12 hours before I was supposed to be on stage to actually deliver it. And I always thought to myself, that is a strange thing for an exec. I didn't know that you got to do that. I didn't know that you got to just opt out of those types of things and hand those things down to the people below you. But that happened to me. So
that's interesting. That's interesting. So talk about the Keystone Innovation District, kind of your challenges and kind of what you see in the horizon and what you want to accomplish.
Sure. So just to kind of set the stage, an innovation district is really, it's not a real estate project. It's a placemaking initiative where you're developing a neighborhood, and you're developing a neighborhood that is full of entrepreneurs, corporate innovators, university players, specifically focused on commercializing research. So you're really just creating this community, this neighborhood, 18-hour a day, 7-day a week kind of area where innovation thrives and where people are starting to collide, whether it's in bars and coffee shops. So it's just economic development initiative that is huge in scope. It's very large, but it's really about brokering alignment between different factions and stakeholders to get them to come together to do it. And in a city like Kansas City, I think that's extremely, these aren't new. These have been around for 25 plus years. I mean, you have things like University Research Park in North Carolina, which is kind of the granddaddy of them all. You have Kendall Square in Boston, where Harvard and MIT are at. You have those, but then you have smaller ones or newer ones that have emerged. Technology Square in Atlanta, Cortex in St. Louis are examples of ones that are maybe closer to us. But Kansas City has some unique challenges in that we have a state line that almost splits our city in half. And that political boundary really matters when it comes to getting bi-state collaboration. And I'll just use the universities as an example. You have a board of regents on the Kansas side and a board of curators on the Missouri side that have very different views of where their universities should go and how they should partner. And they see that political boundary as a defensible boundary to keep students and keep resources in their state. Well, the university leaders don't see it that way. They don't want to see that boundary. They want to recruit kids into their state. They want people to be successful and go to jobs. And in any city where they're successful, they want to show those outcomes where people are in New York City or in Chicago or in all these other cities. So even when it comes to research and research commercialization, they don't want to see those political boundaries, but the people who make those decisions for them do absolutely see those political boundaries. And that is just one example of how difficult it is to do something like this, to do a bi-state initiative in Kansas City. I always tell people, we'll do something on one side of state line, and then we'll feel like we have to do something just like it on the other side of state line. And instead of getting two of things, we get half of everything. And so we never really realize the full potential of the region when we do those types of things. So That's probably been the biggest challenge, is really trying to navigate that ability to broker alignment between competitors or frenemies or whatever you want to call them. I think that's one. Two, I'm not an economic development guy, right? I was a corporate executive. I managed innovation. I managed corporate engagement with entrepreneurs. I'd done all the things that happen in an innovation district, but I'd never managed the development of one. So again, when I go back to this lifelong learning, it's been a fantastic opportunity for me to learn a lot of new things. But boy, it's not like when you start a new job and the proverbial drinking from a fire hose. I've been drinking from a fire hose for about 6 years, and it's tough when you're doing
Right.
it for that long on this many types of things. And we've tried to do this very differently than it's been done in other cities. We are doing this very differently than it's been done in other cities, in terms of doing it with an equity lens from the beginning and ensuring that it's an innovation economy that's built for everybody, right? And ensuring that we do have bi-state regional collaboration, ensuring that we are using best practices of community development, and engaging the local community and building this thing organically from the ground up. Those are all things that we've done and done successfully with this, but it's been the longer path, the harder path, even if it is the right path.
Yeah, no, I can imagine how difficult it would be. I'd love your thoughts on two topics, and you can choose to address each of them, or one of them, or none of them. But one is, and we can do a whole, hour segment on artificial intelligence, AI. But what are your thoughts in terms of what you're trying to do? And obviously, AI plays a big part in that space, so that's one of the topics. And the other is, I think one of the challenges for the the older generation of leadership is kind of how do you leverage the Gen Zers, um, the younger generation of the workforce coming up, the emerging leaders. Love your thoughts, like I said, on either of those two topics.
Yeah, I'll take them both on. Kansas City in general is unique in that I mentioned that there were three sub teams in that Casey Rising initiative. And the sector sub team, when you look at the segments and the industries that Kansas City has, we have a very diverse industry set. And we're always trying to figure out what our identity is and what our leading cluster is. And we don't have one, which is great in a down market because it protects us against a recession. It protects us on the downside, but it's very hard to cluster against. It's very hard to build industry clusters or innovation clusters when you don't have that clear identity, unless you focus on these horizontal technologies and the benefits that these horizontal technologies bring to some of these industries. Because what they do is they start to thread those industries together, and the innovation happens in between the lines. And so for us, when you look at things like blockchain, cryptocurrency, or when you look at artificial intelligence, or you look at some of these emerging tech, electrification just in general, and some of the sustainability and environmental things that are coming out from a technology perspective, carbon capture and so on, how do you use those things cross industry? How do you use those things to benefit all the industries? And I think that that's the big opportunity. Artificial intelligence is an underlying technology. It's not an industry, right? It's a technology that can be used, and we've already seen it in such a short amount of time. And the last thing I'll mention before I get to the other question, I had the opportunity to participate in a program called Singularity University when I was a Sprint executive. Peter Diamandis leads this organization, the X Prize, Singularity University. And the thing that they really kind of preach in that first day when you're there and immersed in the program is this exponential rate of change. Things are happening so much faster. And you have, I think at one point it was 70-year life cycle for an industry, from the time an industry was created to the backside of an industry. And now you're looking at industries that can, come up and go down and within a decade, and have shorter life cycles, and company life cycles are shorter, and things are happening faster, and with computing changes and networking changes and all of those things. And so focusing on things like you can't ignore these new technologies, and you do at your own risk, I guess, because things are happening so quickly that you have to be more immersive. And I think that really leads into the next part of what you asked, Jeff. And I think they're tied together. I get a kick out of when people talk about Gen Z and the attributes of Gen Z or whatever. And especially when I talk to some of the folks that are in Gen Z marketing, and they say, oh, well, Gen Z thinks this way and nobody's ever thought this way before. And I'm like, yeah, except the young kids in the 60s and the young kids in the 80s and the young kids in the 90s, like, except everybody who's been your age ever before you. And I think that there's this idealistic sense of what the future can be when you're that age. And as we get older, we lose, we become less pliable, right? We become like, we're more fixed in our thinking. And I think if we want to continue to be successful as we get older, it's important to continue to listen to those generations that are coming behind us. As much as we hope they listen to us, right? I know I get really frustrated when my kids, it's the whole touch the stove thing, right? Like, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove, and they have to touch the stove to learn it's hot. I think it's the same thing. We always hope the younger generations will listen to our wisdom and listen to our experience and not make the same mistakes we made. But I think sometimes you got to flip that paradigm and you got to listen to the youth and what are the things they're feeling and seeing, and what are the things that we as leaders or we as the elders in the room can be better at, and not be so fixed and forced to say, no, it's got to be like this. So I think there's more and more opportunities. They're not special. And I say that not in a way that, in a way to be derogatory or detrimental to that generation or any generation that's coming up before us. They're not special in that I do believe those mindsets have existed before. Those mindsets have been in generations before them, and you lose those as you get older, not on a period of time that's so unique. Now, there's certainly some unique things about where we're at as a society right now that maybe makes those issues different for younger generations. And that's why it's important for us to listen to that. The impact of social media. Jeff, you and I know you're a little older than I am, not much, but I know when you and I got done with school at the end of the day, when we were in high school or in middle school or junior high or whatever, when we got done with school and we went home, the only interaction we had with kids was the kids that lived in our neighborhood or the kids that you'd hop on a wired phone with the long tangly cord that you could maybe get into another room so your parents couldn't hear you on the conversation, right? Those are the only interactions we had with kids. Today, that interaction with your social clique, or the social clique that's even bigger than you, that's like the whole school or the whole universe, those interfaces and interactions for our young kids don't stop ever. They're 24/7. You can go to bed at night and a rumor can get started after you go to sleep. And by the time you get to school in the morning, everybody's talking about it. And if it was about you, or if you didn't know about it or whatever, it's tough as a youth to keep up with things and the pressures like that. And I think as older, we can't just say, oh, just turn it off. It doesn't work that way. Like, that's what we would say. We would say, just turn it off. But it doesn't work that way for them. And unless we're listening to them and trying to understand what those issues are, our ability to influence change and our ability to be successful leaders and the successful elders in the room is dampened if we're not open to hearing those voices and open to hearing what those kids are saying.
Yeah, I love your take on both of those topics. That's a really great insight. Thank you, Kevin. Well, to stay in the Gen Z topic, I love to help two groups of people on the podcast. The first group is the people that are graduating college right now. What as they begin their journey on getting their first job and starting their post-college professional journey, what advice would you give them, Kevin?
Man, I love this question because this is, so there's two things that I always try to tell young people. One, building your network is not the goal. Nurturing your network should be the goal. Because if you're just trying to accumulate, contacts, and you're just trying to accumulate a big network, when you need it and when it's supposed to pay off for you, if you haven't put in the work to nurture your network, then it becomes very transactional and it becomes very ineffective. So drop a line to people every now and then. I'm still trying to figure this out, Jeff, to be honest. So this is that advice that you're like, don't do as I do as I say. But the opportunity for you to lean into your network when you need it is really more valuable when you've been able to nurture those relationships over time, so it doesn't feel transactional to everyone who's involved, right? So while building your network is important at a young age, ensuring that you nurture the network you have, and you continue to nurture that network as you get older by keeping it vibrant and keeping it active is extremely, extremely important. Because again, I go back to, and we'll die on this hill, a guy named Larry Porterfield sat me down in his room one day and had me go through and map my entire career. He had a yellow piece of ledger paper he was writing all this down on. He said, tell me how you got this job. Tell me how you got this job. Tell me how we just kind of went through my career progression. And then he'd flipped the pad of paper around, he slid it across his desk and said, all right, every job that you've ever had, you got because of somebody you knew, not because of what you knew. It was always a contact you knew. It was always someone who referred you. It was always, one of those things about, I knew this person before I got this job. So the importance of your network is huge. So stay on top of your network. And the second thing I would say, and this is more of a mental health thing, I think, is the phrase, this too shall pass. And I think you got to really embrace this idea that this too shall pass, whether it's when you're at your highest highs or when you're in your lowest lows, remembering that that moment will pass. And so appreciate when you're at the highs, but know that at some point in time, it's going to level back out for you. But also when you're at your lowest lows, just remember this too shall pass. You can get through this. You can get through these changes and these challenges, and things will get better. It's all a big cycle. So those are, I think, the two things that I like to impart to those who are coming up behind me.
Yeah. Great advice. And I was lucky enough myself to work under Larry as a great leader. And may he rest in peace. He's a great person.
Absolutely. Enjoyed my time with Larry. It's great to learn from him.
Last group is just, hey, once you become a leader on the org chart, and then you don't have to have people that you're responsible for on an org chart to be a leader. But once you do get, that you are responsible for people and a team and strategies, what leadership advice would you have for them as they begin that leadership journey?
Higher up. I think what is it? A's hire A's, B's hire C's. And I think hiring those people who are smarter and more have a higher aptitude and higher ceiling than you is always scary for managers. Jeff Luther, I don't know if you remember Jeff or if you knew Jeff, but Jeff Luther was one of those individuals who, as a director, when I was a manager, he said, look, the mark of a good leader is when the people who you've hired and nurtured around you move up and beyond you in an organization. And that's a tough mindset to have when you're building a team or when you're building an organization, is to hire people that one day you might report to or one day might be higher than you. But it's your best bet for success, and the way you build strong teams is to hire up. So I think that's definitely one of those things that that I would say early managers, young managers, don't be afraid of hiring people who you think are smarter than you. We always hire people that we think we can control or that we want to control, but that's not the game. That's not what you should be after. And then I think the second thing, Jeff, is I had another leader, a guy named Terry Inch, who sat me down one time. I was thinking about taking a job in another organization, and Terry, in his infinite wisdom, I was worried about, well, what happens if I leave this organization? What happens to this? What happens to my team if I leave? And I was so focused on my value to the existing organization to not take this other opportunity. And Terry said, look, it's all like a bucket of water, Kevin. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you got a big bucket of water and you stick your hand in it, you just swirl it around. That's you in the organization. Take your hand out of that bucket of water. What do you have? I don't know, a bucket of water. He's like, exactly. So don't overvalue your importance in an organization. And that was a humbling experience for me, right? That was one of those, that's my manager basically telling me to go take another job.
Right.
And you could take that one way as he doesn't find value in what the work I did, or you take it in the other way as, I think the learning is, build an organization that's sustainable, that's resilient, that isn't going to be impacted by one person's departure. Right. Build an organization that's a solid team of people that have a solid vision and solid direction of where they're trying to go. And then the impact of one person leaving your organization should not be that great. And I try to take that as I build organizations, as I building organizations in my career since then. I've always used that bucket of water lesson as a way to think about how to build strong organizations.
Yeah, I love that. Kevin, it's so great to talk to you. I love your career. I love what you're going to be doing in what you have done with Keystone Innovation District, and I'm sure the great things to come. So thanks for coming on the Corporate Couch today.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was good getting reconnected with you, and I look forward to more conversations in the future. So thanks for having me on.
So great to catch up with Kevin. We met in the early days of Sprint, now T-Mobile. But when we met, he was on the phones smiling and dialing, selling long distance services. But I loved he talked about it. He was young. That was basically his first job out of college. Basically he, got married and had a kid on the way, I believe. So he was doing inside sales for some building company or something. And they said, hey, right down the block, Sprint has a huge call center and they're looking for people. So,
and that's a great job for somebody in that situation.
Oh yeah, 100%. And he talked about it. He goes, it's a numbers game. He learned that, it's all about a numbers game, and you deal with rejection. So it built in him, and whoever does it and is, stays with it and is fairly successful in it, it builds up grit and resilience, because you hear 8 to 9 no's for every yes. So you have to say, okay, I got rejected. They're not rejecting me. They're rejecting the product, or they're good with their current carrier, whatever. The other thing I took away from Kevin, well, there was a lot of things, but he worked at a mature company, Sprint, but he was the definition of an intrapreneur, right? Being that entrepreneur inside a big company, right? So he was in the early days of, South by Southwest, working with companies in Silicon Valley on the leading technologies, and looking and seeing how small companies, startups worked, and how fast they got things to market, and not being afraid of failure, because you're going to fail a lot. And it's just I forget how he phrased it, but it's basically stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. You start something, it goes out, and it's something wrong, you stop it, enhance it, and that's a continuous cycle. So he learned a lot about that. And just he went to Singularity University, the Peter Diamandis thing, in the early days of that. That's incredible. So yeah, it was just fun. I'm sure you went through memory lane of
I did. He kept dropping names, and I thought, yeah, I remember him, and I remember her, and I remember Ron LeMay, and all those people. It's not like I was buds with any of them, because they were all on a completely different pay grade than I was. But the whole entrepreneurship is another thing where you're allowing the corporation and actually to take the risk of your success or failure, and that frees you into whatever it is that you're trying to pursue in your passion. There were so many things, and one of the things that he brought up was he had a line that I've heard before and I believe in, but he only had half of it, because one of the things he was talking about a meeting where he had, and he was giving some advice after that meeting, where he said that your job is to make your boss look good, And I've always heard it said, make your customer happy and make your boss look good. But the concept is still the same. If you make your customer happy and make your boss look good, you will be successful. And that's all.
He was kind of young at the time when he got that advice, and he kind of was pissed off in the beginning. He's like, what do you mean? Like, you're my boss. Like, you're supposed to look good. But he was mature enough to understand that, once he thought about it, he's like, yeah, I get that.
One of the neat things about that, about make your customer happy and make your boss look good, is it deflects all of that away from you. This isn't about you, right? This isn't about giving the world's greatest presentation or making the world's greatest sale or something. Those are all internal things to you. And that's not what success is. Success is when you impart that success onto other people by making your boss look good, so that he'll look good in front of his boss, for instance, and make your customer happy so that he'll be satisfied that the resources that he spent on your product were worth it in the life that he's leading. There was so much we can go on and on about Kevin.
And actually, there's one other thing I thought was phenomenal. Based on his role at Sprint and being this entrepreneur, he was the CEO of Pinsight Media, basically a subsidiary, a business unit of Sprint, but it wasn't on the Sprint campus. He was downtown, and part of his job was to get out into the community, because he was running that, and then Sprint Accelerator. So it was a community thing. So what I loved about that, like if you're an executive, at a, big or small company, you're basically inwardly focused, but he had to get out and work with leaders of the community and other CEOs based on his job. And that led to this current job, being the CEO of Keystone Innovation District for the last 6+ years. So, just a phenomenal story. But
right.
Based on it, I'm sure you have some great leadership wisdom that you like to share with our audience.
I have leadership wisdom from the great philosopher Ron Swanson. And Ron Swanson, one time when he was talking, he said, "Dear frozen yogurt, you are the celery of desserts. Be ice cream or be nothing."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.